They say a child cannot choose their father, but a mother certainly can. In this case, that choice made all the difference. Jesse McFadden, an individual with a troubling past, was given the chance to become a father figure to 3 teenagers. However, on the day he was supposed to appear in court, he didn't show up. Instead, the police discovered 7 bodies at his home. All had been tragically shot. The big question is, how could this tragedy have happened? By the end of this video, you'll have your own thoughts. Brace yourself, as this is a case you won't forget. This incident occurred about a year ago in Henrietta, Oklahoma, and it all began with Holly McFadden. She was a 35-year-old mother of 3 teenagers, 2 daughters, Tiffany Guest 13 and Riley Allen 17, and a son, Michael Mayo 15. The children had different biological fathers, but all of them called Tiffany's father Joe. Dad Joe was more than a father figure, he was their rock. He and Holly had been married for 13 years before they divorced, and Joe had been a constant in Riley's life since she was only a year old. Even after the marriage ended, Joe's love for the children never wavered. He cared for them like his own, and even wanted to adopt Michael and Riley, but then everything changed on May 26, 2022. When Holly remarried Jesse McFadden. Tragically, this is where their story took a dark and unexpected turn. From the outside, their life appeared idyllic, a happy marriage and a blended family. However, no one was ready for the horrifying truth about Jesse that would come to light just a year after they married. It's unclear whether Holly knew about his past before their marriage, but we do know her mother discovered troubling details about Jesse months before the tragedy. We'll dive into those details soon. Jesse McFadden, born in Kansas, dropped out of school after the 10th grade. He had a troubled legal history, first encountering trouble in 2002 for underage drinking. He later admitted to stealing a significant sum of money from his grandfather. Despite this, it was in 2003 that his past truly darkened. He was convicted of a serious crime and sentenced to 20 years in prison. During his time in prison, Jesse's troubling behavior continued, leading to concerns about his release. Despite his actions and troubled history, Jesse was eventually released early in October 2020. Many questioned how someone with such a past could have been allowed to leave prison. His release came with certain restrictions, but Jesse ignored many of them, continuing to engage in questionable activities. Even though the court was aware of his past, his trial was delayed for years, which allowed him to build a new life, marrying Holly and becoming a stepfather to her children. The events leading to the tragedy began on the final weekend of April 2023, when Ivy Webster and Brittany Brewer, 2 close friends, were invited to a sleepover at Tiffany's house where Jesse McFadden lived. The weekend was meant to be fun, filled with typical teenage activities. On Saturday, Jesse took the girls out shopping and to a local entertainment center. Ivy kept her mother updated through messages, but by Sunday, something seemed off. The next morning, none of the children, Brittany, Ivy, Tiffany, Michael, or Riley, appeared at school. Worried, the parents reported the children missing to the police. Meanwhile, Jesse McFadden was due to appear in court that same Monday, but he never showed up. When officers arrived at his home, they were met with a horrifying discovery. 7 bodies were found on the property. The victims included Jesse himself, his wife Holly, her 3 children, and Ivy and Brittany. All had been tragically shot. The bodies were found scattered across the property, with Ivy, Brittany, and Riley discovered some distance from the house. Authorities quickly pieced together the sequence of events, concluding that Jesse had taken the lives of his family and friends before ending his own. What could have driven Jesse to commit such a horrifying act? The motive remains unclear, but unsettling clues emerged. Text messages sent the night before the trial revealed Jesse's state of mind. He expressed frustration over his life falling apart and blamed others for his situation. These messages painted a picture of a man desperate to avoid facing justice. One of Jesse's earlier victims, Crystal Smith, shared her story, revealing the terror she experienced years earlier. She expressed deep regret that Jesse had been released from prison, fearing he would harm others, a fear that tragically came true. In the aftermath of the tragedy, investigators discovered disturbing evidence at the McFadden home. The house was filled with unsettling items, raising questions about what might have been happening behind closed doors. The investigation uncovered various devices, disturbing materials, and items that pointed to deeper, troubling secrets. Despite the tragic end, this case serves as a stark reminder of how important it is to pay attention to warning signs and never ignore potential risks. Jesse McFadden had a dark past that had been overlooked or misunderstood by those around him. His ability to mask his true nature, even from those closest to him, is a chilling lesson. In the days following the discovery of the bodies, the families of the victims and law enforcement officials began to piece together the final days of their loved ones. The shock and horror of the incident left many wondering how Jesse McFadden had managed to hide his dangerous past for so long. Holly's mother, Jeanette Mayo, was one of the first to uncover Jesse's criminal history. She and her husband had accidentally found information about Jesse's past while researching a co-worker's background, which led to a difficult conversation with Holly. Despite learning about Jesse's troubling history, Holly had been manipulated into believing that everything was a misunderstanding. Jesse went so far as to hire someone to convince her that his previous legal troubles were exaggerated. Holly's assurance that Jesse had passed a background check gave her family false confidence, but the tragedy revealed how deeply Jesse had controlled Holly and her children. Jeanette later shared how Jesse had isolated Holly, dictating where she could go and controlling every aspect of her life, including tracking the children's phones. In the aftermath, the victims' families were granted access to the home where their loved ones had spent their final moments. What they found inside was beyond disturbing. The house was filled with items that suggested long-term manipulation and control. Various forms of restraint were found, as well as disturbing materials that raised even more questions about what had been going on inside the McFadden home. Jeanette, who lost her daughter and grandchildren, described Holly as a loving, protective mother who had been tragically deceived by Jesse. She expressed disbelief that such horrors could have been unfolding right under their noses. Jesse had managed to deceive everyone, hiding his true nature until it was too late. The parents of Ivy Webster and Brittany Brewer were equally devastated. They had no idea about Jesse's background and believed the sleepover to be a regular, safe weekend event. Ivy's mother, Ashley, and Brittany's father, Nathan, spoke about their daughter's bright futures and how this tragic event had cut their lives short. Both families shared fond memories of their daughters with their boarders, with Ivy's mother recalling how thoughtful Ivy was, never failing to say "I love you" in her messages. Brittany's father, Nathan, fought back tears as he spoke about his daughter's dreams of becoming a teacher or a veterinarian. In the days following the tragedy, many began to question how someone with Jesse McFadden's past could have been released from prison. The system, it seemed, had failed to protect these innocent lives. Despite multiple warnings and red flags, Jesse had managed to slip through the cracks, continuing his disturbing behavior even after his release. His ability to manipulate those around him, including Holly, and hide his true intentions left a lasting impact on the community. As more details about Jesse's life came to light, it became clear that this case was a tragic reminder of the importance of vigilance and thorough investigation. Those who knew Jesse in prison, such as James Fleming, described him as deeply troubled. Fleming shared how unsettling his interactions with Jesse had been, and how it was clear, even then, that Jesse's behavior was a serious concern. Yet, despite these warning signs, Jesse was released and allowed to continue living a seemingly normal life, even marrying Holly and becoming a stepfather to her children. The case remains a heartbreaking reminder of how individuals with dangerous pasts can sometimes hide in plain sight. It also raises questions about how the justice system could allow such a person to be released without adequate supervision, especially considering the nature of his previous crimes. While Jesse may have been able to mask his true intentions for a while, the consequences of his actions were devastating for the families involved. As we conclude this story, it's important to reflect on the lessons it teaches about being aware of the people we let into our lives and the importance of staying vigilant, especially when it comes to the safety of our loved ones. This tragic event serves as a stark warning that we must not ignore the signs of danger, no matter how well someone seems to hide them. The aftermath of the tragedy not only shook the families involved, but also led to a deep reflection on how such events could be prevented in the future. Many began to question the processes and protocols that allowed Jesse McFadden, someone with such a troubling history, to reintegrate into society without more significant scrutiny. While the courts had delayed his trial for years, giving him the opportunity to marry and become a stepfather, the systemic failures that allowed him to bypass restrictions were glaring. Authorities investigating the case uncovered more disturbing details as they dug deeper into Jesse's past and actions. It became apparent that Jesse had carefully constructed a facade of normalcy, fooling not only his family but also those in his community. Friends and neighbors who interacted with him described him as quiet, reserved, and generally polite. None had suspected the dark secrets he kept hidden. Holly's own family was deceived by Jesse's charm, which allowed him to manipulate those closest to him without raising suspicions. Holly's mother, Jeanette, spoke about how Jesse gradually gained control over her daughter's life. She shared how Holly, once an independent and loving mother, became increasingly isolated under Jesse's influence. He controlled every aspect of her life, from where she could go to whom she could see. Holly's own children were affected as well, as Jesse closely monitored their interactions and movements. Despite these signs of control, the family felt helpless, unsure of how to intervene. The investigators working the case discovered a chilling amount of evidence in the McFadden home, which painted a grim picture of the last days of Holly, her children, and their friends. The items found suggested that Jesse's actions were premeditated and that he had been preparing for the horrific events that unfolded. Restraints, locks, and other disturbing items indicated that Jesse had planned meticulously, likely intending to control his victims before the tragedy took place. The parents of Ivy Webster and Brittany Brewer were also left with the unbearable weight of questions. They had trusted Jesse with their children, unaware of the danger he posed. Both families had known Holly for years and had built a friendship based on that trust. The revelation of Jesse's past and the horrifying events that followed left them devastated. Ivy's mother, Ashley recalled the night before the tragedy, when she had been texting with Ivy and everything seemed normal. Little did she know that those would be the last messages she would ever receive from her daughter. As the investigation progressed, the public and media began to scrutinize the systems in place that had allowed someone like Jesse McFadden to remain free. Why had he not been kept under stricter surveillance? Why were there delays in his trial? And how did someone with such a past manage to evade the system's safeguards? These questions ignited a broader discussion about the gaps in the justice system, particularly in handling individuals with serious criminal histories. In response to the tragedy, some lawmakers began advocating for changes to the policies surrounding parole and early release for convicted individuals with violent pasts. The case of Jesse McFadden highlighted the need for better tracking, monitoring, and support for victims, ensuring that repeat offenders could not slip through the cracks again. The community in Henrietta, Oklahoma was left reeling, with many feeling that the justice system had failed to protect innocent lives. One of the most emotional aspects of the case was hearing from those who knew Jesse during his time in prison. James Fleming, one of Jesse's former cellmates, spoke about his deeply unsettling behavior while they were incarcerated together. Fleming recalled how Jesse's personality was often fixated on troubling subjects, and how their interactions made him increasingly uncomfortable. These details, which had not been fully addressed by the authorities at the time, raised more concerns about how someone with such a dangerous profile was released without sufficient safeguards. For the families of Holly McFadden, Ivy Webster, and Brittany Brewer, the path forward is filled with grief and a desire for justice. Jeanette Mayo, Holly's mother, has since become a voice advocating for changes in the system, so no other family has to suffer the way they have. The pain of losing her daughter and grandchildren in such a devastating way has motivated her to push for reforms in how the system deals with individuals like Jesse McFadden, who present a clear danger to society. The tragedy of the McFadden family Sleepover massacre will forever remain a dark chapter in the town of Henrietta's history. It is a stark reminder that vigilance and awareness are critical when it comes to protecting our communities. While the justice system seeks to balance rehabilitation and public safety, cases like this show that there are times when the balance fails with heartbreaking consequences. As we reflect on this case, let it serve as a reminder to never ignore red flags, to ask questions, and to ensure that proper background checks and safeguards are always in place, especially when it comes to the safety of our loved ones. The world can be unpredictable, but by staying informed and aware, we can prevent future tragedies. If you found this story compelling and wish to learn more about similar cases, please consider subscribing to our channel for more true crime documentaries. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.